Hey there, it's me, and I've got a story that's going to hit close to home for many of you. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely betray you? That's exactly what happened to me. My tickets to a life-changing event were stolen right from under my nose, and I said nothing. Until one Monday morning, everything changed. I had enough. But why did I let it go on for so long? How far should you let people push you before you stand up for yourself? Tell me, have you ever kept quiet when you should have spoken up? Let me know in the comments. Let's talk about it. I've always believed that family was my anchor, the one thing in life I could rely on. The love we shared, the small moments that filled our home, were my heartbeats. Yet, in the quiet stillness of my suburban life, there was a growing undercurrent of doubt, one I couldn't shake, even if I tried to ignore it. It was mid-morning when I came home from grocery shopping, my mind still replaying the conversations I had with the neighbors about their children's school performance. I'd never been much of a gossip, but today something felt different. There was a weight, a pressing discomfort. I opened the door, the usual hum of our house greeting me, but there was something off. Daniel, my husband of 8 years, was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up. It wasn't unusual. He often lost himself in his devices. But today I noticed the faintest smile on his lips, one that didn't reach his eyes. It unsettled me. "Hey," I said softly, putting the bags down on the counter. "How was your morning?" "Fine," he replied, his voice distant. "Just busy." His eyes remained glued to the screen. I could feel a knot form in my stomach. It was as if something had shifted in the air, something unspoken. The tickets. Earlier this week, I had told him how excited I was about the charity event I was attending, how important it was to me. It wasn't just any event, it was a chance for me to reconnect with old friends and make new ones, a much-needed escape from the daily grind. I had worked hard to get there. Yet now, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I didn't expect him to do anything about it, really. After all, it wasn't like he'd be interested in something so frivolous. But I didn't expect this. When I finally opened the drawer where I kept the tickets, the space was empty. I blinked a few times, hoping it was a mistake, but no, there they were, gone. I stood frozen for a moment, feeling the room close in around me. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned slowly to Daniel, still absorbed in his phone. "You took them," I said, my voice barely a whisper. His fingers paused mid-scroll, but he didn't look up. "What?" "The tickets, the ones I've been talking about for days." "Oh, yeah, I gave them to someone else. I thought you'd rather—" He trailed off, finally lifting his gaze. But it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was an excuse, one that felt empty, hollow. My chest tightened, but I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. How could I? The hurt was there, raw and vulnerable, but it was buried deep, beneath a layer of confusion and disbelief. I stared at him for a long moment, my mind racing with questions. Why hadn't he consulted me? Why did he feel like it was okay to make that decision for both of us? And why, in that instant, did I feel so small? But the worst part wasn't just the act. It was the silence that followed. The silence that I had chosen. I could have confronted him right there, demanded an explanation, maybe even shouted. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, my thoughts a whirl of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, helplessness. I was angry, yes, but something inside me stopped me from acting on it. I wanted to speak, but the words were stuck. I didn't know what I would say if I did. So I remained silent. I spent the rest of the day trying to push the incident to the back of my mind, forcing myself to focus on the kids, on dinner, on anything that wasn't the sinking feeling in my stomach. I tried to pretend that nothing had changed, but the truth was, everything had shifted. I just hadn't confronted it yet. As the evening wore on, I felt the tension build. Small, seemingly insignificant moments seemed to amplify the underlying discord between us. The way Daniel didn't really look at me when we talked. The way he seemed preoccupied, distant. I had learned over the years that silence could be as loud as any argument. But in this case, my silence was a choice. A choice to not escalate, to not make things worse. But every time I turned away from him, I felt the distance grow. Every time I smiled at him and asked how his day had been, I felt the weight of that unsaid question. Why had he stolen those tickets from me? Why hadn't he told me? And as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I realized something else. This wasn't the first time. It was just the latest in a string of small betrayals, things he'd done without thinking of how they affected me. I remembered the time he had promised to help me with the kids' school project, but then forgot all about it. Or the time he had agreed to attend a parent-teacher meeting, but canceled at the last minute without offering an explanation. These weren't huge betrayals, but they added up, and with each one, I had felt a little more invisible, a little less valued. Tonight, however, felt different. I didn't have the answers yet, but I had a sinking feeling that this was more than just a simple oversight. There was something beneath the surface, something I hadn't yet seen, but was beginning to understand. As the night drew to a close, I was left with only one question. Should I confront him? Should I demand an explanation? Or should I stay silent for now? I didn't know yet, but I knew one thing. This silence was no longer just about the tickets. It was about me, and the longer I stayed silent, the more I felt like I was losing myself. The days that followed Daniel's betrayal felt heavier than the ones before. My frustration, the simmering anger beneath the surface, seemed to grow with each passing moment. At first I told myself I was overreacting, but how could I be? I had tried to let it go, to just move forward, but there was no escaping the gnawing ache that had settled inside me. And when I finally confronted him, I thought it would ease some of the tension, perhaps bring a semblance of resolution. "Why did you take the tickets, Daniel?" I asked, my voice far quieter than I wanted it to be. He barely looked up from his phone, his face indifferent as he tapped away on the screen. "It wasn't a big deal. I thought you wouldn't mind," he said, as if it was the most trivial thing in the world. I waited, expecting more. A reason, an apology, something. But all I got was silence, and that dismissive tone of his that made my insides twist. He didn't get it. He didn't understand. And that moment, that one quiet exchange, made it clearer than anything ever had. I wasn't just angry about the tickets. I was furious at his complete lack of regard for my feelings, for me. The silence stretched between us. His indifference felt like a slap across my face, and I could feel the walls inside me slowly starting to build up. The anger within me was real, burning and sharp, but so was the hurt. How could he be so casual, so detached from everything I was feeling? I had expected a fight, a confrontation, or at least an explanation. What I got instead was something colder, something worse than indifference. I had always tried to make excuses for him. Maybe he was busy, maybe he just didn't realize how important the event was to me. But in that moment, as I stood there, the air between us thick with unspoken words, I knew the truth. This wasn't the first time he had brushed me off, dismissed me, belittled me without ever acknowledging it. I'd let it slide before, ignored the small slights because I wanted to keep the peace. But peace was overrated. What I had with him wasn't peace. It was complacency, it was silence, and it was slowly killing me inside. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The resentment started to build, bit by bit. Every time he came home late without a word of apology, every time I asked him to help with something around the house and got nothing in return, the bitterness started to settle in deeper. And now this, stealing something so small, yet so significant, without a care in the world? It wasn't just the tickets, it was everything. I started to look at him differently, each glance feeling colder, more detached. I saw him for what he truly was, a man who had no respect for the person who had given him everything. My anger wasn't just an eruption, it was a slow burn, a quiet fury that didn't show on the outside, but raged inside. The thought of all the times he had put me second to his job, to his friends, to his own needs, made my stomach churn. What had I become in this relationship? Someone who accepted being treated as an afterthought, someone who allowed herself to be forgotten. And for what? I couldn't stand it any longer. The hurt, the frustration, the sense of betrayal. It was suffocating. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I mattered to him. It wasn't just about the tickets anymore. It was about a pattern I couldn't ignore any longer. The way he had treated me all these years was never going to change. Not unless I did something. I wasn't sure what that something would be yet, but I knew this. I wasn't going to let it slide anymore. Not this time. The tension that had been building finally reached its peak as I stared at him across the room. I had to do something. My mind raced with the possibilities. Confront him again, demand answers, make him feel what I felt. But no, that would be too easy. He'd never take me seriously. He'd just shrug it off, like he always did. No, I needed something else, something more powerful, something he couldn't ignore. I stood there, the silence between us now a heavy, oppressive weight. He didn't even notice, lost in his own world, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. I had had enough. The anger inside me wasn't just burning, it was a fire, and it would not be put out until I was done. I wasn't sure how I would make him pay for this, how I would make him understand what he had done. But I knew one thing for sure. This time, I was going to be the one who took control. It had been days since our last confrontation, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I replayed the conversation in my head over and over, each time coming back to the same unsettling conclusion. His indifference wasn't an accident. I had to know more. I needed answers. I spent the next few hours combing through old messages, browsing through his social media profile, trying to piece together a story that made sense. And then something caught my eye. A conversation. One I wasn't meant to see. It was a message from a woman, someone I'd never met, but her words cut through me like a knife. She spoke of a broken promise, a stolen opportunity, a manipulation so carefully crafted, it took me a moment to process. This wasn't an isolated incident. This had happened before. My mind raced, a storm of emotions swirling inside me, betrayal, anger, confusion, but above all, disbelief. Was this real? Had he been doing this to every woman he's been with? My hands shook as I tried to absorb the gravity of what I had just uncovered. There it was, clear as day, the pattern. The lies, the empty promises, the manipulation. It was all part of the same game he had been playing with me and with others. I wasn't special. I was just another piece in his web of deceit. I sat down hard, the weight of this new revelation crushing me. The feeling of being duped, of being just another pawn in his sick game, made me want to scream. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let myself be swept up in his lies for so long? My thoughts turned dark. The rage inside me grew, swirling into something more violent, more potent. He had done this to me, to countless other women before me, and I had been too naive to see it. The pain from earlier now felt like a faint memory, replaced by an overwhelming desire for retribution. Why had he done this? Why me? Why them? My mind grappled with these questions, seeking answers that I was sure would never come. But no matter how hard I tried to make sense of it, the truth was undeniable. I had been manipulated, just like everyone else. The truth stung, but it also gave me clarity. I had been fooled, yes, but I was no longer that woman. The woman who believed his empty words, the woman who looked past his flaws and embraced his promises. I had seen through it all, and now all I wanted was to understand why he kept doing it. I thought back to every moment I had spent with him, the way he made me feel special, like I was the one he wanted, the promises of a future together. How many times had he said those words? How many times had I let myself believe him? I couldn't stop the tears from falling as I realized the truth. Every "I love you," every sweet gesture had been part of his plan. My feelings had been manipulated, my love exploited for his gain. This wasn't just about the tickets, it was about control. He had always had the power, and I had been too blinded by my emotions to see it. I was no longer that woman. The one who tolerated his lies, the one who let him get away with it? No, this was different. This was my moment. I had to take control of the situation. I had to make him see the consequences of his actions. The anger was still there, burning inside me, but now it was a controlled fire. I was ready to confront him, ready to tell him that I knew, that I wouldn't be his victim any longer. I stared at the phone in my hand, the screen reflecting my own anger and resolve. I had no idea what the next steps would be, but I knew one thing for sure. I would no longer be a passive participant in his game. I would make him pay. It had been days since I had confronted him about the betrayal, and the weight of it still pressed down on my chest. My mind was a maze of thoughts, mostly anger, but tinged with confusion. How could someone be so indifferent to the pain they caused? I hadn't yet found the answer, but I was starting to see the shape of it. Then came the offer. I was sitting in the cafe, staring out the window, lost in thought when he appeared. His presence, as usual, felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. He slid into the seat across from me, his smile smug, as though everything was still under his control. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his tone too smooth, too practiced. "And I want to make things right. Let's put this all behind us. I'm offering you something, a sum of money that should help ease the discomfort." At first, I didn't even know what to say. My mind was still processing the audacity of it. He thought he could buy me, buy my silence. My emotions swelled, insulted, disgusted. His words dripped with entitlement, as though the money could wipe away the damage he'd caused. But no amount of money could ever undo the hurt. Not for me. He leaned in, his face inching closer to mine, eyes fixed on me as if waiting for some sign of relief or gratitude. But instead, I gave him nothing. I shook my head slowly, the words coming out with a coldness I didn't know I had in me. "I don't want your money, and I don't want your apology. What I want, you can't offer." The rejection hung in the air like a thick fog, and I could see it in his eyes. This was not what he expected. He smirked, trying to mask the discomfort with his usual arrogance. "You really think you're better than this? That your pride is worth more than what I'm offering?" His words were sharp, but there was a crack in his demeanor, a flicker of uncertainty. I didn't flinch. "You don't get it," I said, standing up, my voice steady. "This isn't about money, it's about who you are, and I won't let you think for 1 second that you can buy me." I left before he could say another word, feeling a strange sense of empowerment wash over me. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel weak. His money, his manipulations, they didn't matter. I had made my decision, and nothing would change that. The anger inside me continued to fester, though. I had rejected his offer, but the sting of betrayal was still fresh. I found myself questioning everything. Why had I allowed him to manipulate me for so long? Why hadn't I seen it before? My mind replayed the moments where I had made excuses for him, where I had let myself believe the sweet words, the promises. But now, with clarity, I could see it all. He didn't love me. He had never loved me. He had loved only himself, only the control he had over me. The more I thought about it, the more disgusted I became. I was no longer willing to be the pawn in his game, no longer willing to play by his rules. But I didn't know what to do next. My mind raced with possibilities. I could confront him, make him admit everything, force him to face the consequences. Or I could leave him in the past, forget him entirely. But something inside me stirred. A deeper need for justice, something quiet and deadly, something calculated. As I walked away from the cafe, the weight of what had just happened settled over me. His arrogance, his mockery. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't the same woman I had been when I met him. The woman who thought she could fix everything with love. No, I was stronger now. I had to be. I needed to take back what he had stolen from me, my dignity, my self-worth, and I was going to do it in a way he'd never expect. The anger simmering inside me wasn't just the result of betrayal. It was the birth of something new, a resolve, a promise to myself. I didn't need to react immediately. I needed time to plan, time to strike when it would hurt him the most. But for now, the most important thing was that I had rejected him, and in doing so, I had taken my first step toward reclaiming my life. I hadn't expected to be here, sitting in the quiet corner of a cafe nursing a cup of tea I barely tasted, staring at a woman I didn't know yet felt like I had always known. It wasn't just the coincidence of us sitting there, Two strangers meeting over a shared betrayal. No, there was something far deeper at play. The palpable tension in the air, the shared understanding between us that the man we both trusted had used us, manipulated us. I could see it in her eyes. She knew exactly what I was feeling. Her name was Rachel, and she had been with him for a year. A year. I had been naive enough to think I was the only one, the special one. How wrong I had been. She had the same hollow expression in her eyes that I must have had when I walked into the cafe. Disbelief mixed with anger, confusion swirling with a sharp, gnawing ache. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but there was no mistaking the fury in her words. She, too, had been duped by his charm, his promises. He had convinced her he was different, that he truly cared. The way she recounted her story hit too close to home. It mirrored mine. The same promises of love, the same manipulation wrapped in sweet words. He had told her he was working on something big and needed her support. In the end, she, like me, had fallen for his act, blindly trusting that he was someone worth fighting for. But the truth had shattered her just as it had shattered me. We exchanged contact details, a silent agreement between us to keep in touch. It wasn't just for comfort anymore. It was for the revenge we both knew we deserved. There was strength in numbers, and together, we would make him pay for everything he had taken from us. I left the cafe with Rachel's number in my phone and a fire in my chest that I hadn't felt in weeks. I had been walking around like a ghost, numbed by the pain of betrayal. But now I was starting to feel something different. A mixture of validation and disgust had settled inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman he had used, every woman he had deceived. The anger was growing inside me, but it was different now. It wasn't the mindless rage I had felt earlier. It was focused, calculated. I could hear his voice in my head, mocking me. I could hear it so clearly, his dismissive tone, his arrogant laugh. And with every ounce of that memory, the more resolute I became. He was going to regret everything he had ever done to me, and to Rachel, and to every woman who had ever trusted him. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was no longer going to sit back and let him walk all over me. I had learned the hard way, but now I knew the truth, and the truth had power. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could. I dug through my memories, looking for the signs I had missed, the small details that had never seemed important at the time. I was meticulous, obsessive even. Nothing could slip past me. I contacted Rachel again, and together we began to piece together the puzzle of his life, his lies, and his manipulation. The more I uncovered, the more my anger intensified. He had done this before, and he had done it to countless others. Every story I uncovered, every detail Rachel and I uncovered, only fueled my determination. He thought he could take what he wanted without consequence. He thought he could hurt us without ever facing the truth. But he was wrong. The planning, the plotting, it felt different now. Every part of me that had once felt weak, passive, was now sharpened, like a knife ready to cut through the tangled web of lies he had woven. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. No. This time, he was going to face the music. It was late one night, alone in my apartment, that I finally felt the weight of what I had become. The rage, the plans, the strategies. I had become a force to be reckoned with. I wasn't just plotting revenge. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity. I wasn't the woman I had been a month ago. I was stronger now, more certain. As I sat there, a quiet calm settled over me. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was preparing. The confrontation was inevitable. I could feel it in my bones. And this time, when I looked him in the eyes, it would be him who would feel the heat of my fury. I was ready. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that almost feels too still. I sat by the window, the sun casting long shadows across the room, and tried to steady my breath. The realization hit me like a wave, crashing against my chest and making everything feel far too real. The man I had thought I knew, the man I had opened up to, had never cared for me. Not truly. The relationship, all of it, had been a game to him, a calculated move in some twisted game of power. He had never wanted me. I was just a pawn to him. And that thought settled deep in my gut, where it began to boil. I was nothing but a distraction for him, a way to pass the time. He didn't care about my dreams, my aspirations, my feelings. He had used me, all of it had been so easy for him. It was never about love, never about us. It was about control, and I had let myself be controlled for far too long. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the truth crush me for a moment, before anger surged to the surface. I thought about everything. The late-night calls, the promises made, the time I had wasted thinking he actually wanted me by his side. It wasn't real. None of it. It was all a game for him, a game I was never meant to win. His words echoed in my mind, each one more hollow than the last. "You're important to me," he'd said. "I care about you." Lies, all of it. And now I saw it for what it truly was. He had dismissed me, ignored me when it was convenient, used me to fill whatever void he had at the time. I'd been a fool to believe otherwise. It was in the little things, the subtle gestures I had overlooked at the time, the moments when he'd act distant, when he'd talk about his other priorities. He'd never made me feel truly valued, not in the way a person should feel when they are with someone who cares. No, I was nothing but an accessory in his life, and the realization was gut-wrenching. But I was done being his pawn. He had taken enough from me, and now I wasn't going to let him take any more. Not one more second of my life, not one more drop of my energy. I stood up, pacing the room, my thoughts a whirlwind. I couldn't keep living like this, letting him control the narrative of my life. No longer. This was my life now, my story to tell, and I would no longer let him dictate the terms. I realized then that I had the power to change things. I had always had it. I just needed to see it. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. I had built myself up before, and I would do it again. But this time, I would do it without him. This time, I would take control. There were no more questions, no more wondering what he thought, how he felt. He didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was what I was going to do next. My phone buzzed on the table, an incoming message from a number I didn't recognize. I picked it up, and for a moment, my heart skipped a beat. It was from her, the other woman. "I know what he's done to you," the message began. "I won't let him hurt you or anyone else anymore." She and I had talked before, shared our stories, and the anger that had built between us was something I could feel in my bones. Together, we would make him face the consequences of his actions. Together, we would stop him from playing with other women's lives. I smiled, not out of happiness, but out of the knowing. He wouldn't see us coming. He wouldn't even know what hit him. As I stood there, alone in my apartment, I realized that everything had shifted. I wasn't the woman who had once cried over him. I wasn't the one who had let him use her. No, I was stronger now, and I would show him, and everyone else, just how strong I was. I was ready to take control of my life, ready to break free from the chains he had placed around me, ready to reclaim what was always mine. And so, the plan began to form in my mind, subtle yet powerful. He wouldn't be able to see it coming. I wouldn't confront him directly. I didn't need to. Instead, I would break the ties he had with his family, the connections that gave him power. I would do it from the shadows, manipulating the pieces of his life in a way that would make him realize what he had lost. I wouldn't beg for his love. I wouldn't fight for his affection. I had something far more powerful, my dignity. And no one, not even him, would ever take that from me again. I took a deep breath, standing tall in the stillness. This was it, the moment of truth, the beginning of my plan. And I was finally ready to move forward. There's something hauntingly satisfying about watching a person slowly unravel, especially when you've carefully set the stage for it. Every detail, every action I've taken, has been part of a deliberate, quiet assault on his most precious connections, his family. It's strange how the calmest of approaches can be the most devastating. For so long, I had been his pawn, but now I am the one holding the strings. The first seeds were easy to plant. A casual remark to his sister about his recent behaviors. A half-told story to his mother, framed just right to hint at his selfishness without outright accusing him. Small things, but enough to make them question him. Just enough to make them doubt. As the days passed, I watched from the sidelines as these subtle shifts in perception began to take root. What once seemed like innocent words now felt like whispers of truth, their effects reaching deeper than I had imagined. But I wasn't content with just unsettling his family's trust. That was only the beginning. I wanted to destroy his place in their lives, and for that, I needed something more, a secret, something dark enough to fracture the bonds that held him in such high regard. I knew just where to look. It wasn't hard to find. Secrets have a way of lingering in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to come to light. I had been patient, biding my time until the right opportunity presented itself. And when it did, I took it. A quiet conversation with a trusted family member, a whispered confession about his actions that he had kept hidden. The shock on their face was worth the years of pretending to be the obedient, supportive girlfriend. In that moment, I knew I had planted a bomb that would slowly tear apart his world. The result wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. His family began to shift. The support he had once taken for granted started to erode, piece by piece. His sister no longer laughed at his jokes with the same affection. His mother, always so eager to defend him, became quieter in his presence. The cracks were forming, and I could feel the satisfaction build with each passing day. But even as I watched this unfold, a strange feeling crept over me. It wasn't guilt. It was something else, something heavier. I had orchestrated all of this, but at what cost? Watching him slowly lose his standing with his family brought a sense of cold victory, but it also left a bitter taste in my mouth. I wasn't just breaking him down, I was breaking something inside myself too. Was it worth it? The temptation to push further was strong. The pieces were falling into place, but there was something about pushing him to the brink that unsettled me. I had wanted to be in control, to watch him lose everything, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure how far I wanted to go. Did I want to be the one who completely destroyed him, or had I already won by simply watching his world unravel? For now, I decided to step back. The damage had been done. He no longer had the unquestioning support of his family. What would come next was out of my hands. He would have to face the consequences of his own actions without me having to say a word. There was no need to push him further. He was already spiraling. I stood in front of the mirror that evening, looking at my reflection. The woman who had been broken by him was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had taken control. The game was over, and I had won. But as I stood there, I wondered, was this the end? Or was I just preparing for the next round? There was something comforting about the idea of going back to where it all started. The place where I once felt safe, where I could pretend to be someone I wasn't, and where the days moved slowly enough for me to hold on to the illusion that I could find peace. I packed my things quietly, almost methodically, the house around me feeling emptier than it had in years. The fight had drained me, emotionally, mentally, and physically, and so I decided to retreat. I was tired, worn out by all the battles that never seemed to end. I just wanted to escape to the place where I could hide from it all, if only for a little while. I arrived back in the familiar surroundings of my old life, trying to capture some semblance of the comfort that used to be there. The worn-out furniture, the creaky floorboards, and the smell of the place, everything felt like it had been waiting for me. But as soon as I walked through the door, a wave of unfamiliarity washed over me. It didn't fit anymore, not like it used to. I could almost feel the sharp contrast between who I had been and who I was now. I was a stranger in my own life. The first person I ran into was an old neighbor, someone who had always been warm and kind to me. She smiled at me, welcoming me back with that same familiar warmth. But when we spoke, I noticed something I hadn't expected. The ease with which I had once slipped into this role of the quiet, compliant daughter was now gone. I wasn't that person anymore. Her kindness felt like a mask, something to keep us both trapped in a time that no longer fit. She didn't understand that I had changed, that I had outgrown this world. I tried to force myself to relive the simpler days, those carefree times when I had been so absorbed in the small details of life that I hadn't seen the larger picture. But now, the smallest moments felt hollow. The things I once treasured, The long afternoons spent in idle chatter, the weekend brunches where I had been a passive participant, felt like they belonged to someone else. I visited an old friend, someone I had known since childhood. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee the way we used to. But the conversation felt strained, as though the words were forced out of us, fitting into the spaces of our old friendship that no longer had any room for me. I tried to smile, to pretend that everything was the same, but it wasn't. I could see the cracks in the surface of the life I had once loved, and suddenly, all the things that had seemed so important seemed ridiculous. I had spent years trying to fit into this mold that never really suited me, and now I realized just how much of my time I had wasted. In the attic, I found an old letter. The envelope was yellowed with age, and the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was from my mother. I had read it countless times before, holding on to the words that once gave me comfort. I opened it again, expecting it to provide closure, to bring me peace. But as I read, something shifted. The words that once made me feel secure now seemed distant. They no longer resonated with me in the way they once had. I had outgrown them. I had outgrown everything about this life. Sitting in the quiet of the attic, I realized the truth. I could never go back. Not truly. The person I had been in this house, in this life, was gone. I wasn't her anymore. And more importantly, I didn't want to be. I had spent so much of my life running from the reality of who I had become, hoping that I could somehow turn back time. But time had moved on, and so had I. I stood up, leaving the letter on the dusty table. It wasn't mine anymore. The past was no longer mine to claim. The more I tried to force myself into the life I had once known, the more I saw how much I had changed, how much I had grown. I couldn't keep pretending. I walked out of the house, not looking back. The future was waiting for me, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. No longer weighed down by the past, I stepped forward, embracing who I had become. It was time to move on, to build a future that wasn't defined by the girl I had been, but by the woman I was ready to be. The realization was almost unbearable. I stood in front of the mirror looking at the woman who had become a stranger to the life she once knew. Every step of the way had led me here. The betrayals, the pain, the silence, the exhaustion, all of it had shaped me. And now, for the first time in so long, I saw a woman who didn't need to apologize for her strength. There was no turning back now. He thought I wouldn't act. He thought I would cave, like the old me. But I had already disappeared from his life, long before he could even grasp what was happening. The ties that once held me to him, the ones I had tried to force myself to maintain, had long been severed. I had escaped, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, in every possible way. He had no idea that the woman standing here now wasn't the same one who had once walked away in defeat. The past few months had been a blur of emotions, but now, in the quiet moments of reflection, everything had become clear. The victim who had once been crushed beneath the weight of his words and actions was now a distant memory. I was in control of my life, of my future. The power I had always sought was never outside of me. It was within, and it had always been. The moment of clarity hit like a thunderbolt. I wasn't the weak, insecure woman who had once believed his lies, his manipulations. No, I was someone else now, someone who saw through the facade of the man who had played the victim, the one who had twisted every moment to suit his own needs. And now, the truth was finally coming out. Everything he had done, his deceit, his betrayals, was no longer buried in the shadows. People were talking. They were beginning to understand the truth, and it was beautiful to watch him unravel. He had paid the price for everything he did, and the fall was swift. The more I heard, the more the pieces fit together. He had lost everything, the people who had once believed in him, his reputation, his career. All of it had been shattered by his own arrogance, his lack of respect for anyone around him, including me. It was all coming to light now, and no one could deny it. When the news hit, when the consequences of his actions came crashing down, I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel joy. I felt relief. Finally, the weight of the past could be put to rest. His actions had destroyed his world, not mine. I had walked away, yes, but it was because I knew I deserved more. I was no longer willing to play the part of the victim. The last time I saw him, it was not a confrontation I had planned or even wanted, but as I stood in front of him, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of closure. His eyes were wide, his words fumbling, as if he didn't know how to fix what was broken. But nothing could be fixed. Not anymore. "I'm not the weak person you thought I was," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "I've taken back control of my life. I don't need you or anyone to define me anymore." He had no words, no defense. The man who had once held so much power over me stood in front of me, utterly powerless. And for the first time, I truly felt like I owned my power. It was mine, and no one would ever take it from me again. As I walked away from him, I felt an unfamiliar sense of freedom. It wasn't just the end of him. It was the beginning of something new, something that I could now shape for myself. I thought about the journey ahead. The road was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would never be the person I was before. I had walked through fire and I had come out stronger, wiser, and more certain of who I was. Life, I realized, wasn't about waiting for something to change. It was about changing yourself. And with that, I felt the finality of everything. As for him, he lost everything he held dear, all because of a single irreversible mistake. And me? I was just getting started. As I reflect on everything I've shared, one truth stands clear. You are not defined by your past, and you are not bound by the actions of others. Life has a way of knocking us down, but it's how we rise that matters most. What I've learned through all the hurt and betrayal is that true power lies in embracing who we are, no matter what others try to label us. It's about reclaiming your voice, your strength, and your right to live on your own terms. So let me ask you, how do you define your own strength? Have you ever felt trapped by someone else's perception of you? And when was the last time you took a step back and realized your worth? If this video spoke to you, if it made you think, please take a moment to drop a 1 inch in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join me as we continue to empower, connect, and grow together. Thanks for being part of this journey. See you in the next one.